film?
It's the
rolling set. Good energy?
People are turning to zombies because of the chemical
Oh,
factors, right?
my
I don't see how the guy playing
Really,
Detective
Martin?
Hathaway can ask where the zombies are coming from.
Well, it's confusing, dude.
We'd shot that scene where they're sitting on the curb waiting for Alice to pick them up, and it was perfectly fine, but had a sort of low energy. And I remember one of the editor assistants said to me, I wish that there was a little more fun in that scene, frankly. Because it's the one time they're all together before the train crash where you can see what they are. And I thought, that's a good point. And it just kind of stuck with me. A couple weeks later, we were shooting a scene in the car where a bunch of the kids were in the car, and we were resetting and driving back to the beginning to restart the scene. And the kids were just off camera, just relaxing, and they were all singing. And the way they were doing it was so sweet and funny, and I was just laughing, listening to these kids be themselves. And I thought, that's what that scene needs to be. So one night, we were back in Los Angeles, and we had about a half an hour, and it was almost starting to rain. And I convinced the DP, Larry Fong, to very quickly set up the same lighting on a curb. And he was like, we can't match it. It took, 4 hours to get that lighting set. I'm like, Larry, we have to do this. Tonight's the night. And he just scrambled. And the kids were there, and I'd given them My Sharona that morning on an iPod, and they had never heard the song before, and they learned it that day. And we just shot the scene. And it was exactly what it needed to be, and they'd become friends over that month or two that we've been shooting. So it felt like a group of friends hanging out, doing what they would be doing, and it was a much more magical moment, I think, for the movie.
You're my little pretty one, my pretty one. When you gonna give me some time, Shona? Make my motor run.
That's the second time I've tripped over that bag. You're falling, poor Alice. Cheesy joke. That's the second time.
Well, JJ was part of the young cast. It was kind of not like an adult directing kids. It was like a bunch of kids trying to make up this movie as they went along. It was really amazing to watch.
Just make sure that when you land, you stay there and not...
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Great. That was good.
When I saw the movie for the first time, I was so happy he cut out his own lines off camera because JJ was throwing ideas to the kids while the cameras were rolling. Do this. Say it this way. Oh, instead, say this. I mean, he was like doing verbal rewrites. And the cameras are turning into film. It's not digital. It's not video, And I just thought that was amazing to watch that happen. It's kind of the way I directed E.T. I mean, I had often a running dialogue with the kids to the point that when Henry Thomas saw the film at the sneak preview in Dallas, Texas, he was in tears after the film was over, and I thought that he was crying because he was so emotionally moved by the picture. And he wasn't. He turned to me with great anger in his eyes. He said, "Why didn't you take your voice out?" And he actually, at this very young age, heard my voice talking to him throughout the first time he ever saw E.T. with an audience.
That's amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, in a sense, I got that little bit of flashback when I was watching JJ direct this because it was really a amazing electricity, was positive energy while the films were being shot between JJ and the entire cast.
This is not just about Super 8, just in general. The monster is almost like secrets that people don't really want to know the answer to. So, for example, like, people will say, when I was working on Lost, people would say, so wait, what's that? What's the island? Don't tell me. Like, they would literally tell me not to tell them the second they asked the question. And I think monsters, you want to see the monster, but at the same time, there's something wonderful about it being withheld and hidden and sort of just off camera. Well, it's my favorite thing that you did, whether it's Jurassic Park or Poltergeist or any number of films, Jaws, where you put not just adults, but kids in jeopardy.
Yeah, but but it's also, there's different kinds of horror. You know, there's turn your eyes away and, you know, listen to the movie, don't watch most of it horror. And then there's kind of giddy horror, the kind of horror you can't peel your eyes away from the images, because there's always a little bit of a twinkle on the periphery of every idea. There's just a little bit of a wink to the audience. Not enough a wink to label it a put on or a satire or a send-up of other genres, but just enough of a little bit of a twinkle that the audience feels that they're safe, they're in good hands, and they're going to come out intact at the other end.
If they find you, you and your parents will be killed. Go!
I used to sneak into R-rated movies, like, you know, horror movies all the time. I'd stand, like, I'd stand on the side of around the corner of a movie theater, so the person working in the booth wouldn't see me. And like any grown-up who would walk by, I'd say, "Excuse me, would you mind buying me a ticket for, you know, whatever, Mother's Day, some horrible, you know, horror movie that was, I know that my parents wouldn't want me to see and would never buy me a ticket for." And it was unbelievable how often they would say yes. Now, in retrospect, I'm like, who would do that? Like, if a kid asked me, maybe I would, actually, come to think of it. But I would sneak in, and I would watch, you know, these movies that were usually grotesque, crazy horror films. But there was something about scary movies that just, you know, was incredibly compelling to me. I just loved scary movies.
Joel, let me try. God, I hope my electronic football's in there.
Joe, this is impossible, man. There's no way we can do this. These things are made like a bank vault, like a safe. Professional robbers can't even get into these things. They're so strong.
Shit.
I loosened it for you.
Guys, look at all this junk.
He's got movies in here.
Well, it's funny because people have said, "Oh, was this meant to be an homage to Stephen?" And that was never the intent from the beginning. It was meant to revisit a time in my life that was so impactful and powerful. But that time was so impacted by the films that I loved, and those movies were, you know, in many cases, movies that Stephen had done. So it wasn't that I was trying to make an homage to those films, but that time in my life was, you know, and there are other films as well. You know, there were horror movies that I loved, and there were other adventure films that I loved, and monster movies that I loved. But when I think about that time in my life, it's impossible to separate the impact of cinema at that time from being that kid making those movies. It was sort of the thing that inspired me to make them.
So it's almost like you don't anticipate their turn. Meaning they make this turn here, and you're watching them go up, but almost frame them more to the right, so that when they turn into the driveway, you kind of do a quick pan.
I'm someone who has done sequels, and I'm responsible for movies that are based on other things. But the experience of making this movie was a very personal one. It's the first thing I've worked on that was something that I, at least in some regards, lived myself.
We've gotten calls from people who found local dogs, but the calls coming in aren't local.
Lucy!
It's like they all just ran away.
And to be able to sort of excavate these ideas and these memories and these feelings of childhood and, you know, things that, because they weren't based on some pre-existing concept, were somehow a little bit scarier to play with. And the sort of safety net I had was Stephen.
I've got property damage, I've got theft. I've got 9 people missing now. There are things happening around here that I can't explain.
I think when you're a writer, you know, you got to write what you know. And so if JJ had never made an 8mm movie and had never started his career that way, I don't think JJ would have been able to have the kind of resonance as a storyteller to be able to hit those key points.
We have to find this thing. I don't feel good about this.
Because those kids, they're the movie. That's why it's called Super 8 and not, you know, the thing from Planet Mongo.
Which was our other title. Yeah.